Dream Whispers. Margaret Chen stared at the water stain on her apartment ceiling, watching it grow larger with each passing rain. 6 months ago, she'd been sleeping under crown molding and cathedral ceilings. Now, the brown blotch above her Murphy bed seemed to mock her with its organic sprawl, like spilled coffee on her life's blueprint. The apartment was 1,100 square feet on a good day. On bad days, which were most days lately, it felt like a shoebox with pretensions. Her divorce attorney had warned her that Richard's forensic accountant was thorough, but she hadn't expected to discover that half their assets had been mysteriously transferred to offshore accounts months before she'd found the texts from his 26-year-old yoga instructor. "Community property," she whispered to the ceiling stain, her voice hoarse from disuse. The phrase had become a bitter joke. What community? Richard had dissolved their community the moment he decided she wasn't enough anymore. Margaret rolled over and checked her phone. 2:47 a.m. Another sleepless night in paradise. She'd taken to falling asleep with YouTube playing home renovation videos mostly. Something about watching other people transform broken spaces into something beautiful felt like a prayer she couldn't quite articulate. On the screen, a cheerful man in paint-splattered overalls was explaining how to repair water damage. The most important thing, he was saying, is to address the source of the problem, not just cover up the symptoms. She must have drifted off, because when she woke to her alarm at 6:30, the video had changed. A woman with kind eyes and graying hair was speaking directly to the camera. "You were not born to be small. You were not born to apologize for taking up space. You were born to expand, to grow, to become the fullest version of yourself." Margaret sat up, blinking. She didn't remember subscribing to any motivational channels. Must have been the algorithm serving up what it thought she needed. She turned off the phone and shuffled to the bathroom, catching sight of herself in the mirror. When had she started looking so defeated? At Meridian Real Estate, she settled into her desk outside Evelyn Hartwell's office. At 68, Evelyn was a force of nature. Silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and worth more than some small countries. She'd built her empire from nothing, and she didn't suffer fools gladly. "Margaret!" Evelyn's voice cut through the morning quiet. "My office, now." Margaret's heart sank. She'd been making mistakes lately, small ones, but mistakes nonetheless, forgetting to return calls, mixing up appointment times. She fully expected to be fired. "Close the door," Evelyn said, not looking up from her computer. Margaret perched on the edge of the leather chair, hands folded in her lap like a penitent child. "You're squandering your opportunity to be great." The words hit Margaret like a slap. "I'm sorry, I know I've been... Do you know what I see when I look at you?" Evelyn finally raised her eyes, and there was something unexpected there. Not anger, but frustration? Disappointment? "I see someone who's forgotten who she is. Someone who's let circumstances convince her she's small." Margaret's throat tightened. "I'm just a secretary, Mrs. Hartwell." "Bullshit." Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "You've got instincts, girl. I've watched you with clients. You know what they need before they do. You understand spaces, how people live in them, what makes a house feel like home. But you're sitting here filing papers and answering phones like you're serving penance for some crime you didn't commit. I don't understand what you're suggesting." "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you. You're wasting yourself. And frankly, it's painful to watch." Margaret left the office feeling raw, like Evelyn had peeled back her skin and exposed something she'd been trying to hide. Was she being cruel, or was she being kind? Margaret couldn't tell the difference anymore. At Grind Coffee, she stood in line behind a woman in yoga pants who was scrolling through her phone with aggressive intensity. The woman suddenly cursed under her breath, crumpled up a piece of paper, and tossed it toward the trash. It missed, landing at Margaret's feet. "Free summer tuition for adults 50+. Riverside Community College," the flyer read. Never too late to start again. Margaret stared at the paper. 52 wasn't old, but it felt ancient after everything that had happened. When was the last time she'd thought about learning something new? In her marriage, Richard had always been the one with ambitions, with plans. She'd been content to orbit his dreams. That evening, she found herself on the community college website, browsing course catalogs. Real Estate Fundamentals caught her eye. The description was simple. Learn the basics of real estate law, property valuation, and client relations. Prepare for the state licensing exam. Before she could talk herself out of it, she filled out the application. She fell asleep that night to another home renovation video, something about foundation repair. But when she woke in the pre-dawn darkness, a different voice was filling her apartment. Success isn't about where you start. It's about refusing to stay where you are when you know you're meant for more. This kept happening. Night after night, she'd fall asleep to practical videos about fixing things and wake up to voices telling her she could fix herself. She started to wonder if the universe was trying to tell her something, or if she was finally losing her mind. Either way, the words were seeping into her consciousness like water into parched earth. The first day of real estate class, Margaret sat in the back row, surrounded by people who looked like they had their lives together. The instructor, an energetic woman named Patricia, smiled at the nervous faces around the room. Real estate, Patricia said, is really about understanding people's dreams. It's about helping them find the space where their best life can unfold. Something stirred in Margaret's chest, a feeling she'd almost forgotten. Interest, curiosity, the faintest whisper of excitement. She threw herself into the coursework with an intensity that surprised her. Property law, market analysis, negotiation tactics. For the first time in months, her mind felt sharp, engaged. She started arriving at work early to study, staying late to read case studies. Evelyn noticed. "You look different," she said one morning, appearing at Margaret's desk with her usual coffee and penetrating stare. "I'm taking real estate classes." Evelyn's eyebrows rose. "About time. How's it going?" "I love it," Margaret said, and realized she meant it. "I actually love it." "Of course you do. I told you you've got instincts." The nighttime videos continued, but now Margaret was paying attention. The motivational messages felt less random, more intentional. "The woman you're becoming will cost you people, places, and possessions," one voice told her. "She will cost you your comfort zone and your old ways of being, but she will save your life." Margaret started to believe it might be true. 3 months into the program, she was at the top of her class. 6 months in, she passed the state exam on her first try. Evelyn offered her a position as a junior agent immediately. "The commission split is standard for new agents," Evelyn explained, sliding the contract across her desk. "But I have a feeling you won't be new for long." Margaret's first client was a young couple looking for their starter home. She spent hours with them, really listening, understanding not just what they said they wanted, but what they actually needed. When she found them the perfect place, a small craftsman with good bones and enormous potential, they cried at the closing. "You didn't just find us a house," the wife said, hugging Margaret. "You found our future." Word spread. Margaret had a gift for matching people with spaces that would nurture their dreams. She worked with first-time buyers, empty nesters, families in transition. Each success built her confidence, and her confidence built her reputation. The YouTube videos at night had become a ritual now. She'd fallen asleep to home improvement shows and waked to messages that felt personally delivered. Your setback was the setup for your comeback. The same energy that broke you down is the same energy that will build you up. You are not behind in life. You are exactly where you need to be to become who you're meant to be. 1 year after starting classes, Margaret closed her biggest sale yet, a luxury home to a tech executive relocating from California. The commission was more than she'd made in 6 months as a secretary. She started looking at townhomes. 2 years in, She was Meridian's top agent. She'd bought a beautiful 3-bedroom townhome with a garden and a view of the mountains. She'd furnished it slowly, carefully, choosing pieces that made her heart sing instead of just filling space. The old Margaret would have been satisfied. The new Margaret was just getting started. It was at a real estate conference that she met David Torino. He was a developer recently widowed, with kind eyes and hands that moved expressively when he talked about his projects. He was passionate about sustainable development, about creating communities that brought out the best in people. "You understand spaces differently than most agents," he said over coffee after a panel on urban planning. "You see the soul of a place, not just the square footage." Margaret felt something flutter in her chest. Not the desperate need she'd felt with Richard, but something steadier. Interest, possibility, hope. Their first date was a walking tour of a neighborhood David was developing. He showed her the plans, explaining how each home was designed to maximize natural light, how the community spaces would encourage neighbors to actually know each other. "I want to build places where people can become their best selves," he said. Margaret thought about her apartment, about the water stain that had finally been fixed, about the townhome that was slowly becoming home, about the YouTube voices that had whispered her back to life. "I think," she said, "that places have the power to transform us, but only if we're ready to be transformed." David smiled. "Exactly." They were married 2 years later in the garden of Margaret's townhome. Evelyn officiated. She'd gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion, claiming it was more efficient than hiring a stranger. "Margaret," she said in her toast, "came to me as someone who had forgotten her own power. She leaves us today as someone who has remembered it. And that, my friends, is the greatest renovation of all." That night, as Margaret and David settled into their new life together, he'd moved into her townhome, claiming it had better energy than his sterile condo, she realized she hadn't fallen asleep to YouTube in months. She didn't need the voices anymore. She'd learned to hear her own. But, out of curiosity, she pulled up her phone and navigated to her watch history. Months and months of home improvement videos, just as she remembered. But when she scrolled to the motivational content, the videos that had sustained her through her darkest period, she found something impossible. They weren't there. She searched her subscriptions, her liked videos, her entire viewing history. Nothing. No motivational channels, no affirmation videos, no late-night whispers of encouragement. According to YouTube, they had never existed. Margaret stared at the phone, her heart racing. Then, slowly, she began to smile. Some gifts, she realized, aren't meant to be explained. Some whispers come from places deeper than algorithms, from sources more mysterious than the internet. Sometimes, when we're ready to listen, the universe finds a way to speak. She turned off the phone and curled up next to David, who was already asleep, one hand resting on the small of her back like an anchor. Outside, rain began to fall on the roof of the home she'd chosen, the life she'd built, the future she'd dared to dream. But this time, Margaret wasn't afraid of water damage. This time, she knew how to fix what was broken. This time, she knew the difference between covering up symptoms and addressing the source. And the source, she'd learned, had been inside her all along, waiting patiently for her to remember that she was not born to be small, that she was not born to apologize for taking up space, that she was born to expand, to grow, to become the fullest version of herself. The water stain was gone. The foundation was solid. Margaret was home. 3 years later, Margaret Chen was featured on the cover of Real Estate Weekly as Agent of the Year. The article mentioned her unconventional start in the industry and her philosophy of helping clients find not just houses, but the spaces where their dreams could unfold. "I learned," she told the interviewer, "that sometimes the universe speaks to us in whispers. The key is being quiet enough to listen and brave enough to act on what we hear." When asked about her secret to success, She smiled and said simply, "I stopped trying to fix the symptoms and started addressing the source. Everything else was just a matter of time." The interviewer noted that Margaret had an unusual habit of falling asleep to home improvement videos, but Margaret just laughed and said some traditions were too important to break. After all, she never knew what she might wake up to.